Give me 1 second. I'm going to swap this very quickly so that the German one can be in the center. But
Oh, nice.
I think we might be a little bit crooked on Frankfurt still.
Yeah,
If you
okay.
adjust that a tiny bit, if you can.
At the bottom.
That's better.
Who's our guest today, Jeannie?
Today we have Nikhil Nadkarni, who is back from sometime in Germany. Glad you're back.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. Were you gone a whole year?
Yeah, so I was on a research sabbatical over the past year living in Berlin, and I was focused on learning about the German energy transition, Energiewende, and the lessons that it offers for US cities. And I was especially focused on buildings and how we can decarbonize how we heat our buildings.
Well, I love this first picture. It's actually 3 pictures, and I love that it says efficiency first, because I always say that when we're talking about buildings, like you got to do energy efficiency. It's always going to be something cost effective to do. So what can you tell us about these 3 pillars?
So I think it might be helpful to provide a bit of an overview in general. So Energiewende is the sort of economy-wide transition or transformation really of how we use energy. And so it was first used as a term in the 1990s, but really was adopted by the federal government as a policy direction in 2010 in Germany. And so, while it's about energy, there have been sort of these subcomponents. So Verkehrswende is how we transform our mobility. And of particular interest to me was Wärmewende, which is how we transform how we heat our buildings. So within Energiewende, you have these 3 pillars. And there's efficiency first. So how can we do the most with the least amount of energy? And so concretely in Germany's Energiewende, this means there's a national energy efficiency plan that's aligned with the National Climate Plan. And the target that's set out for 2030 is a 30% cut in our primary energy use from 2008 baseline. And so it involves efficiency in industry and buildings and a lot of funding programs to make that happen. The second pillar is renewable energy. And this is probably the pillar for which the German Energiewende has received the most attention and probably the most international publicity. And it's a lot of onshore wind, a lot of solar. And through that, last year, Germany reached 46% of its power coming from renewables, which is really impressive. The third pillar is, I think, super interesting, and that's sector coupling. And so sector coupling is, how do we connect energy across different places? How can we use renewable energy where it can't be directly used? So the third picture here is from the city of Hanover, where the utility is providing wind energy into its EV charging stations. So you have this kind of direct connection between renewable energy and charging. And that's kind of a simple example. But other examples are the use of waste heat from industrial process to heat nearby buildings, and that's happening in Hamburg. And then the more advanced examples of sector coupling are things like using hydrogen. And so kind of broadly, it's about, how can we use renewable energy when and where it's needed?
I bet the Germans have a long descriptive and very literal word for sector coupling, right?
Yes, it's one word. It's Sektorenkopplung.
Wow. It's really a lot of great thought and progress. Like, it just seems like Germany has made so much big change.
With a thoughtful, comprehensive framework.
What are the challenges with heating?
So I was especially interested in heating because I think the challenges in Germany are actually pretty similar to here. So buildings in Germany are about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is, pretty similar to Massachusetts. And 80 to 90% of energy use in buildings in Germany is the result of heating. So like everything else, lighting, electronics, that's 10%, right? And in Massachusetts, at least, we have, also a majority of our energy use in buildings comes from heating, our hot water, things like that. So what you have is power getting cleaner and cleaner. So, in Germany, there's all of this great offshore wind and onshore wind, and we have this 46% number. But heating in buildings is only about 13% from clean sources. And so we have a need to kind of think about that next. But the challenge is huge, right? I mean, despite all of the energy efficiency framework in Germany, only 1% of buildings are renovated each year, and only a third of that is energy related. And so transitioning the way we heat our buildings is going to require insulating millions of buildings. It's going to require switching a lot of our buildings to heat pumps or district energy or solar hot water. And so I think, we have the same challenges here. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from thinking holistically and transformatively about how we heat our buildings.
You're saying the challenges are pretty similar to Massachusetts. Like, what are the methods for making progress? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. Germany has a central building renovation bank called KfW, and they provide loans and incentives. So you can get a 120,000 euro loan for renovating your building with a 20-year term with an interest rate less than 1%. And so it's all these great incentives. But that's really only the first step because, I think it's understood that that's not going to be enough. And so there are these kind of bigger ideas and strategies for how can you renovate our buildings at scale. I think we can be thinking about some of the same things here. So one of the big ideas is Quartiersanierung, or literally sort of neighborhood renovation. And what that means is, how can we look at a group of buildings that might have been built around the same time and have similar construction characteristics and do a retrofit like at scale, right? Do 20, 30 buildings at the same time. And that's really only kind of step one. Step two that's being thought about is, well, you have energy use in these buildings, you have mobility in this neighborhood that requires maybe EV charging, maybe you have solar on some buildings and more energy demand in others. So how can we think holistically about balancing these energy needs in the neighborhood and connecting them together and kind of tapping into some of those synergies? So the neighborhood concept, I think, is going to be a big part of moving forward.
We interviewed Zainab from Heat recently on the Energy Nerd Show, talking about networked ground source heat pumps. And it sounds like that fits right into this neighborhood networked notion that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really exciting to see the work that Heat is doing. There are neighborhoods in Germany where they have the shared geothermal. So that's been kind of growing as a concept there also. There's a lot of value in thinking about not just retrofitting one building at a time, but thinking about how we can sort of link our buildings together, link our homes together, and kind of think a little bit more as a group, instead of individual.
Does the idea of resilience come into play with these neighborhood ideas in Germany? I mean, are there batteries? Is there kind of hardening going on at the same time?
Yeah, I think resilience takes a lot of different forms. While extreme weather might play a bigger role in the US, I think the need for providing cooling is a bigger thing in Germany. There's more concern about heat waves, about sort of long periods of hot weather that hasn't been seen before. So doing something like shared geothermal or district cooling provides a way to introduce cooling into buildings that haven't had it.
So can you tell us what is in one or two of the other pictures you sent?
Sure, yeah. So the next picture I wanted to share was a picture of this tank, and it's kind of a boring picture, right? But so I took this picture in Hanover, which is, a medium-sized German city in the center of the country, and they have a district heating system there, as do many German cities, and this system connects to 4,000 buildings. And so I wanted to share the picture for three reasons. So the first reason was that this is actually an old oil tank and it was abandoned in the 1970s. And today it's actually been renovated into a giant thermal battery. And so the district energy plant cleaned out the oil tank, lined it with 40 centimeters of insulation, and now it stores hot water during periods of low demand and then draws it out during times of peak demand. And so you have this giant battery of thermal energy that can store up to a half day's worth of hot water for the neighborhood, which I thought was super cool and like a really cool use of old fossil fuel infrastructure.
Wow. So the hot water can last the neighborhood, you said how long?
A half day's worth of energy.
So the 40 centimeters keeps it hot even in the winter?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. And so you're able to kind of smooth out the peaks by having this like hot water storage tank for the district energy system. So the second reason I wanted to mention the tank is that the upcoming project for it is to heat that water directly by renewable energy. So this has been piloted a little bit in this project in Hamburg, but similarly in Hanover, what you could do is use wind when you have excess wind, let's say coming off the North Sea at night when there isn't as much electricity demand, and use it to heat that water directly. And so now you're really putting this sector coupling into practice and using renewable energy, using wind to heat people's homes. And I think that's a really fascinating look at how we can use renewable electricity to do so much more than just use it as electricity. The third reason I wanted to share the picture with you is the organization that has built this. And so the utility that's built this is a community-owned utility. And so community-owned utilities are actually not uncommon in Germany. It's sort of a city-level utility that has kind of existed since the time of urbanization in the late 1800s, but has played more and more of an important role. And so now there's about 1,500 community utilities called Stadtwerke in Germany. And, they're participating in the renewable energy market as a whole, but they're also directed by the climate goals of the community that they serve. And so you have this kind of democratically controlled, socially minded, clean energy minded structure. And so while they're providing things like power and renewable energy, they're also doing things like district heating. And the services are really kind of incredible, right? Like they're providing these public services like clean energy mobility, they're providing EV charging. In Dusseldorf, they're providing the e-scooter share program. And so you have the Stadtwerk providing all of these sort of important services for the energy transformation. And so in Hanover, the utility that built this is actually owned in part by the city and in part by the regional government. And so it's really interesting to see how they can, make this transformation happen. One example that comes to mind is in the province of Schleswig, the Stadtwerk has built a shared geothermal loop for about a 200-home neighborhood. And there are other places where they're doing things like hydrogen as well.
Imagine if Eversource were like small, nimble, and responsive to local concerns.
But it sounds like a model that ought to be replicated here. And I'm curious, is there any kind of guidebook or synthesis of kind of what those smaller community utilities are doing? Because they're combining a lot of important stuff. I don't see that happening in the US unless I'm just missing it.
It's interesting, because I think there was a time period in the 90s, it seems like, where a lot of the community utilities were kind of getting privatized or they were getting sold off. So in Berlin, for example, our electricity and hot water came from, a giant multinational utility, Vattenfall. But there's now, in the last 10 or 15 years, a big push to actually remunicipalize some of these services. And there's this kind of grassroots movement. So over the past 15 years, there have been 400 municipal utilities either started or sort of remunicipalized in Germany. And a lot of the impetus for this is about democratic control of clean energy. And so, in Hamburg, for example, they started the city utility just a couple of years ago, focused around what they're saying is socially just, clean energy, and democratically controlled power sources. Just a few years ago, Berlin launched Berliner Stadtwerk, which is this, very sort of grassroots Berlin undertaking. And the city created it actually as a part of the water department there. And it's chartered with just providing clean energy. And it's specifically prohibited from supplying energy from fossil fuel sources.
I've been to Berlin many times, and one of my trips when I was there, they were doing a brilliant job of integrating the S-Bahn and the U-Bahn, like putting the pieces together after the wall. And the other thing they were doing was advocate. They were trying to get people onto the trains. And so they were advertising how great it is that you can drink beer while you ride the train, but you can't do that when you drive your car. And that seems like the kind of local color, local thing that, that's kind of Berlin, right? maybe it's German.
Right. As long as you aren't getting in anyone else's way too much, be free to do what you do.
I mean, I would propose that for Cambridge if there was a chance of that ever being adopted.
Yeah, if you could crack open a German beer while taking the red line.
Sounds good. What's this city street you're showing us on the third picture?
Yeah, I just wanted to share the third picture because that's from this place in Bremen, which is a smaller city on the North German coast. It's a very sort of social democratic, it's a stronghold of progressive thought, big university city. And this is actually a climate workshop, a Klimawerkstatt. And there's a pun in there because it also means climate work city. And so I stopped by just out of curiosity. And what it's providing is a place where you can go to learn about composting and recycling. They have a public space where socially oriented or environmentally oriented organizations can hold meetings. There's a bike repair workshop, and they're doing a lot of kind of the grassroots education and communication and getting people engaged. And so I think it's really interesting that we can work together on these challenges and have a lot of fun with it at the same time. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, let's do more of that. One reason this resonates with me is my grandfather was a coal miner in Germany. So 100 years ago, back in his 20s, which was also the 1920s, he was a miner. And then, to think about that 100 years ago, and now, here we are doing clean energy, and we're talking with you about all this great stuff going on in Germany and around the world. It's really exciting and gratifying.
Wow. Yeah. I got to go on a tour of a coal mine, because now a lot of them are kind of historic sites, and it's crazy the world that they lived in, right? I mean, they were like a kilometer underground or something, they said. And it was not easy work by any means.
Yeah, it was a brutal job. He was happy to come to America.
Well, this is great. There's a lot of inspiring stuff here. I'm thinking of some sort of empty storefronts that we have around Cambridge, and I'm thinking this Climate Works place is, something we could.
I'd have at least one of those.
Yeah, we should strive for that, because that would be great. I feel like people communicate so many different ways, and being able to come together. And
we've got Greentown Labs for the startups, but something more for the neighborhoods and the people, right?
Right. And we have the Fix It workshops occasionally. That's a type of thing that could maybe happen more regularly at a place like that. Talk to people about energy efficiency, right? If they have questions, they could drop by or something.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
That would be great. Well, I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad you shared with us, because I think Germany has a lot of great models for us to learn from, but glad you're back in Cambridge.
And thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great chatting with you. Hopefully we can keep pushing for some of these big transformative ideas here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, a lot of work to do, but it's exciting. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching. This is Energy Nerd Show and Tell.
It's the show that we want to watch, so we're thinking maybe some of you energy nerds want to watch it too. If you do, then tell your friends and subscribe right around here. Click there,
and check
or there, or over here.
Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and where else?
Yeah, and the Energy Nerd website at energynerdshow.com. You can always go there. And if you want to be a guest, you can volunteer to be a guest. We love to have guests. In fact, that's kind of what the show is all about.
Absolutely.